over the past 4 decades have played a vital role in introducing Korean literary voices to the English-speaking world. After earning a PhD in modern Korean literature from Seoul National University, he has gone on to publish nearly 40 translated volumes and more than 185 stories, often in collaboration with his wife, Ju-chan Fulton. Among his most influential translation, I want to mention The Dwarf by Jo Se-hee, 난장이가 쌓아 올린 작은 곡, One Left by 김숨 한명, and There Are Petals Silently Falls by Choi Yoon. He is also the co-editor of the 2023 landmark volume entitled The Penguin Book of Korean Short Stories. Yes, which is quickly becoming a touchstone in Korean literary studies. Professor Bruce Fulton's impact extends beyond the translation. He's also co-authored and edited foundational texts in the field, such as modern Korean fiction, on anthology, and what is Korean literature. Yes, this is. His work includes dozens of lectures, presentations, and roundtable discussion across the globe. In recognition of his lifetime achievements, he was awarded the Manhae Grand Prize in Literature in 2018, one of the South Korea's highest cultural honors, and he has received numerous prestigious fellowships, including the first NIA Translation Fellowship awarded for a Korean language project. So we are so honored to host him here in Siena for this seminar, and we please give a warm welcome to Professor Bruce Fulton.
I'm very forgetful. Oh, and I have a favor to ask you all. My voice, I'm kind of old. In Korean, as we say, 죽을지경입니다. I'm at the point of death. Not really. But sometimes my voice does not project as it should. So if you cannot hear me, please raise your hand. So I'm speaking today, the title of my presentation is Every Translation Matters. I'm going to be discussing 7 novels. The last is about an iconic Korean giseng that is sometimes translated as a paramour, but I think that doesn't do justice to the function of giseng. The word giseng literally means skilled student. So the giseng, although they were outside the 4-level class system of Chosun during the Chosun period, the giseng belonged to a government institute called the Court Entertainment Bureau. So what were they trained in? They were trained in music performance, they were trained in dancing, they were trained in literary composition, and this was at a time when women as a whole were discouraged from becoming educated. Even the women of well-born families. No, women's place is at home. The guys, the bakat yangban, they're the ones who are responsible not only for work, but for literary production, which in its written form was shared only among the tiny percentage of the people of Chosun who were educated in classical Chinese. So I'd like to, I showed you this book. This is a book that my supervisor at Seoul National University wrote about 20 years ago. He wrote a manuscript in Korean called 한국 문학 이란 무엇인가. And he invited me to join him in publishing an English version of this, and the title is a direct translation, What is Korean Literature? But I want to draw your attention to the cover image, which I myself selected because I wanted an image of Giseng to be on the cover. And what you see here is a dance called Sangam Chum. So sang means double. So each of the performers, each of the Giseng has a sword, and they're performing for a group of diplomats who are about to go to China to pay their respects. So Chosun, the kingdom that ruled the Korean Peninsula from 1392 to 1910, was a tributary state of China. It was not a colony, but it was a tributary state that involved diplomatic responsibilities, such as visiting Beijing 2 or 3 times a year in celebration of the Chinese emperor or other auspicious occasions. So what this image portrays is the setting for this is what is now the city of Uiju or Shinjuiju, which is right on one of the rivers that divide the Korean Peninsula from mainland China. So what the diplomats are doing is they're spending a couple of nights kind of getting ready to energize, to do their all-important diplomatic mission. So the instruments for energizing them are these 2 dances by the Giseng, who are wielding swords. So you might think of this as a Chosun version of fighting. You've all heard about that. So if you're in Korea and you're about to do something important, somebody might say fighting, which is a Hangulization of fighting, meaning get your spirits up, do a good job. So, as I mentioned, I mentioned this anecdote to link with the last of the 7 novels I'm going to be discussing, which is called Huang Jini. So, this presentation starts actually with a conference I attended in New York City more than 20 years ago, and the translation was called, the conference was called Translation Matters. So matters, of course, had a double meaning. Matters, a matter can be an item of business that needs taken care of, or it could be, it could emphasize that translation matters, it's important. And so this essay that I wrote, there's also a Korean version of it, and those of you who are interested in the complete essay, I can provide a PDF file to Professor Jung, and she can share it with you. But this essay grew out of a conference I attended at Dongguk University in Seoul, Korea in 1992. And it was my first opportunity to visit Korea after the pandemic. So this essay and a Korean version of it was published in a book. So back to the conference Translation Matters. I was thinking of this conference as a way of contextualizing the last 20 years of the publishing of translations of Korean literature in the US and in the English-speaking world in general. That process used to be, and I will talk more about this next Monday when I talk about literary translation, but the process of literary translation for Ju Chan and myself, and I need to emphasize, among all the nice things that Professor Jung said about my translation activity, almost every published work of translation that I've been a part of is with my wife and co-translator Ju-Chan Fulton. So if you see one of our translations, you'll see both our names on the title, but automatically think of two people. So in that sense, I'm representing Ju-Chan here today as I talk about these 7 novels, all of which we have translated and either published or are seeking a publisher for. The issue that inspired me to focus on Every Translation Matters, or the Korean version is titled Moden Banyagan Jungyohada, all translations are important, is the fact that the publication of Korean literature and translation in the last, say, 15 or 20 years has become very commercial. Now, this is only to be expected in a commercial society, but the problem is, whereas in the beginning there was just us, the translators, and say Hwang Sun-won or Oh Jung-hee or Chae Yoon, the authors, there are now also literary agents who have no concept of professional courtesy. Their job is to sell. Their job is to make money for their authors. And there are also copyright representatives among the Korean publishers of literary fiction. And last but not least, there's also a quasi-governmental organization. It's called the Hangulmun학 Banyagwan. And it has always had what we could understand as a push program for marketing. So they are in the business of subsidizing translations and publications of Korean literary work that are must-reads for foreigners. So this is a push factor. It's not based on the needs of a potential audience, which would be a pull factor. And this is how most commercial activity is undertaken. You find out what the market is like, and then you do what you can to serve the market. No, the Banyakwan, we know what's important, so we're going to tell you what you need to know. So the problem is that among these 5 different actors, there is no generally agreed upon standards or guidelines for professional courtesy. And this bothers me, but enough of my rant. So I decided to put together an essay in which I mention why that the translations we do aren't meant for the commercial market. The commercial market is for quick sales, right? Quick sales. Basically, what you see, and this is also, I think, characteristic of Korean popular culture, the concept of a short shelf life, if you're familiar with that. So if you go to the PAM supermarket, you'll see dates on the products you buy, good until such and such a date. But if you think about K-pop or TV dramas, you'll see that they're very effective for a short time, then they're replaced very quickly, ideally by something equally engaging. So what I wanted to emphasize is that what we think are important translations are the ones that will survive, they'll last, they will stand the test of time, as we say. They will be important 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now. Maybe we'll even get 1 or 2 of them into the Penguin World Classics series. So I'm going to discuss 7 novels, 5 of which Ju-Chan and I have translated, and I'm going to describe why we think they're important. So first up, Jo Jung-nae, O Hananim in Korean. And notice that he's using the term hananim instead of hananim. So the hananim is usually linked in Korean Christian religiosity to the Old Testament, whereas hananim is usually linked to the New Testament. So presumably Jojangnae is emphasizing the long time in which a certain tradition is available. So, but interestingly, his use of this title drew some criticism from the Korean Christian community, especially the Catholic community. And by the way, did you know that South Korea is the most Christian country in East Asia? So I'll be talking about that a little bit later. So he had to change the title, and basically he chose a kind of up yours title, Sarame Tal, a person's mask. It has no meaning. But let me tell you how this came to Jojangnae's attention. And it's important to know Jojangnae is one of our most important living writers. In my opinion, it is he who should have won the recent Nobel Prize that was awarded for the first time to a Korean writer. Jojangnae, to give you some context for this very short novel, is known for 3 multi-volume novels. In Korea, Teha Sosal, which literally translates the French term roman fleuve. And the first of these multi-volume novels is called Taebak Sanmek. It's 10 volumes in Korean, and it's all about the complexities of the Korean War, partisan activity with North Korean guerrilla fighters and sympathizers spread throughout the mountain range, the Taebak Sanmek, that trends from along the east coast of the Korean Peninsula. He followed that with 2 other multi-volume novels, one of 10 volumes, one of 12 volumes, so in all 32 volumes. And the last time we were in touch with him, his publisher reported that these novels, 32, have sold 16 million copies, which is about between 1/3 and 1/4 of the population of South Korea. So he's very well known. But in the last 10 or 15 years, with the exception, he's been writing much shorter works, and this is one of the shortest. So how did it come to his attention? Some of you might remember, I think this was an SBS network series maybe 15 or 20 years ago. I can't remember the Korean name of it, but in English it would be Brothers in Arms. And the focus, Jojangnae took the focus of that, which I will explain now. But to contextualize it, we came across an oral history of D-Day. So D-Day is the day, June 6, 1944, when the Allies launched their invasion of Europe on the shores of Normandy in France. And in the introduction to Mr. Stephen Ambrose's volume, he describes something that came to our attention and probably also Jojangnae's attention. The Allies, upon landing at the Normandy beach, found men wearing German Wehrmacht army uniforms, but their faces looked Asian, and they spoke a language that nobody understood. And these turned out to be Korean soldiers. So the question is, for Jojangnae, how in heaven's name, that's the title of our translation, how in heaven's name did Korean soldiers end up on the beaches of Normandy wearing German army uniforms. And here's what happened. Back in the 1930s, this is more than midway through the Japanese imperial occupation of the Korean Peninsula, every Korean colonial subject, or every clan, I should say, because Korea continues to be a clan-centered society, the one thing they wanted to do was to get a clerkship in the imperial administration of Korea. And this is similar to the Chosun period, when any self-respecting clan would spend a boy's boyhood educating him in the Chinese classics so he could sit for the Chosun Kwago, the government civil service examination. And if he passed that and got a place in the bureaucracy, then the clan was basically set for life. They had a contact in the Chosun power structure. So several young men decide to volunteer for the Japanese Imperial Army, knowing that the Japanese colonial administrators in Korea will look with favor upon their family, and that when they come back to Korea, they'll be treated well. They get an official post, or someone in their family will. So off they go. They join the Japanese Imperial Army, and they're part of a division that is stationed in Mongolia. And already the war has broken out between China and Japan, and China is marshaling troops from Mongolia, and the Soviet Union is also involved, because the Soviet Union for years and years and years had looked with suspicion upon Japan, and more about that later in this discussion. So in the battle with primarily Mongolian forces, the Japanese are defeated, and the Japanese soldiers are under strict orders to commit ritual suicide with each other to avoid being taken into custody. If you're taken into custody and then repatriated to Japan, you will be immediately executed. Well, some of the Korean soldiers decided they didn't want to do this. They weren't that committed to Japan, and so they were taken prisoner by the Mongolian forces in conjunction with the Soviet Red Army. So their captors gave them a choice. You can either go back to Japan, or you can join the Soviet Red Army. So they joined the Soviet Red Army. Flash forward a couple of years later, their unit is dispatched to the capital, Moscow, which is undergoing an invasion by German forces. They're captured by the Germans this time, and they endure a couple of years in a prisoner of war camp, which is rife with cholera, contagious diseases, very cold at night, and the food is not sufficient to keep them healthy. And so once again, 1944, Germany has an inkling of the oncoming invasion by the Allies forces. So again, it gives the Korean, the prisoners of war a choice. You can stay here, or you can join the German army, not as combatants, but as munition suppliers, back helping with logistics, okay? So this is how they end up on the beaches of Normandy. And now they're captured by the UN, the Allies, and specifically the Americans. So they're taken by boat across the Atlantic to the United States, and they end up in a prisoner of war camp in the state of Idaho, which borders our home state of Washington. And they find the conditions there almost like a country club. I mean, it's humane. they're well fed, they're not assaulted or beaten, but there has to be a prisoner of war exchange. And among the, I'll come back to this later. And so a prisoner of war exchange is arranged between the Soviet Union and the United States. And remember, during World War II, the Soviet Union and the United States were allies, but perhaps we can say uncomfortable allies, as we will see shortly after the war. And so the Korean soldiers find themselves on a ship leaving the east coast of the US, bound for St. Petersburg. And I'm not going to reveal the ending, but it is not a happy ending, I'll tell you that. Okay, so what I was going to mention, and this goes back to Soviet suspicions of what's going on in Japan in the late 1930s, while the Korean soldiers are in the Soviet Red Army, there is a Koryo-saram. So the Koryo-saram are those who emigrated to Russia starting back in the 1800s. And there was a very sizable population of Koryo-saram in the Soviet Maritime province. But in 1937, Stalin had decided that war was going to break out with Japan, and he was sure that the Koryo-saram would ally themselves with Japan. So he decided, in effect, to do some ethnic cleansing. And we have been involved in a translation of what may be the first Korean novel to focus on this evacuation, and it is by Imsuk, the same author who wrote Hanmyeong, or One Left, the historic book about the so-called comfort women, which I'll be discussing shortly. 실례지만 몇 시? 1시간 더. 얘기 너무 많이 해요. So what happened was that, according to the Kim Sung book, which she rigorously researched as she did the Comfort Woman novel, the Koryo-saram in Khabarovsk and Vladivostok, they were given 3 days to gather their belongings, after which they would have to vacate their homes. And what happened is they were told to assemble at a railway station, and there, 3 days later, they were put on board not passenger cars, but cattle cars meant to transport livestock. And there they undertook a journey it stretched into most of November. Very cold. They happened to be a very cold late fall in East Asia and Central Asia. And after this journey, during which several of the passengers died, some of them had babies, there were several pregnant women. They were basically dumped out into the open in Central Asia. The style of thinking, they come from a traditional agrarian farming society. They don't know what to do. It turned out that where they were dumped was a place. There were mass graves of people who died in a cholera epidemic. But they eventually did thrive, and today you can see large populations of Korea in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and so forth. So, why is this novel important? Well, it gives us a glimpse into the Korean diaspora, which is one of the largest diasporas in the world. The Korean community in Los Angeles is probably the largest ethnic Korean community in the world outside of Korea. And it also, why is it important? It, yet again, this has been done in quite a few novels and quite a lot of writing history. It illuminates the uncertainties that Korea faced as a colony of Imperial Japan from 1910 to 1945. Okay, next is Kim Sa-gwa and Mina. Do any of you remember a massacre that took place, I think in 2007, at a university in Virginia, Virginia Technical Institute? It was perpetrated by an ethnic Korean, an international student. And I remember the images that went on after. He posted images of himself with guns and ready to go to war. And I think 10 or 15 students and faculty lost their lives in that massacre. So Kim Sa-gwa, who was then barely in her 20s, was wondering how something like this could happen. So she decided that one of the answers was the Korean educational system. And the Korean educational system it was like this when I first went to Korea as a Peace Corps volunteer in 1978, 1979. It's what I refer to as a chulse kind of operation. Chulse, the se means seisang, chul means to leave, to go ahead. So chulse basically means to get ahead in the world, to find your what you believe is your rightful place in the world. And for centuries, that way has been education. It's been literacy. Very ironic, but I could go on another rant about literacy. So she wrote a novel. It's her very first novel. I think it was published when she was 23. Imagine this. Usually, to become a writer in Korea, you have to go through a very intense competitive system, and many writers don't make their breakthrough in publication until their late 20s or even early 30s. But for Kim Sa-gwa, she was age 23, and her focus in this novel is on two high school girls in a kind of upper middle class neighborhood. One of them is very much in chulse mode. She wants to be perfect. She wants to be better than anyone. But her friend Mina has what in Crystal's mind, Crystal is the Imsuk Jung, she's the chulse one. But Mina has developed a character trait that Crystal finds very, very wrong and bad, and that is empathy. So empathy is the capacity. Empathy is stronger than sympathy. Sympathy, you kind of share another individual's feelings about something. But empathy goes a step further and asks you to place yourself in that person's position to get a better understanding of how he, she, they are behaving, what they're doing. So what happens is that Mina, the eponymous person in the title, one of their high school classmates commits suicide. And it's important to realize, I think many of you are aware of this, but Korea has the highest suicide rate of any of the OECD countries. And among the suicides, so I think the statistic is once every 50 minutes or so in Korea, a person takes his or their own life. But statistics suggest that the group most vulnerable to suicide are high school girls. And the preferred method is throwing yourself off the top of a building, which is what the classmate does in Mina. So this leads to an estrangement, a very conflicted relationship. And again, I'm not going to disclose the ending. But you can see from the cover of our translation, just think about what's going on there, and that may give you a hint to the ending. It involves a psychotic episode. These are rarely described in Korea, but Ju-chan and I, as parents of a special needs son, found this novel very, very, very realistic. So, why is this novel important? Well, first of all, it exposes the Korean educational system for what it is. A Yuhak Sang, an international student friend of ours that we met, she was attending the University of Washington around the same time we were completing our master's programs in the 1980s. She became a professor in Korea and was at least once called upon to join a committee, an annual committee that evaluates the various South Korean ministries and ranks them in order of perceived performance. And the year that she was on that committee, the Mungyobu, the Ministry of Education, came in dead last in terms of performance, the most poorly performing unit in the nation's bureaucracy. So also we see, in terms of the psychotic episode, which is, well, I can't give away the ending, but not until, say, 15 or 20 years ago, not many examples of Korean fiction discuss trauma, what it is, how it operates, what you can do to manage it. Can't cure it, it's never going to go away, but you can manage it. So here is an early instance of trauma involving a psychotic episode that hopefully readers could recognize in terms of mental health and well-being. Okay, next is Chun Young's novel Sengang. So how did this novel come about? Chun Young is interested in polarities like good and evil, right and wrong, gender issues also. So one day she read something in the newspaper that she just could not understand. There's a man named Lee Gun-an who was a torture operative during the Chun-Doo-hwan administration in the 1980s. Now, most people who have studied contemporary Korean history know that torture, as in the Japanese colonial period, torture during the almost 30 years of military dictatorship was a standard operating procedure under Park Chung-hee and Chun-Doo-hwan. So in the case of Lee Gun-an, he had been fingered, so to speak, caught by the police for a death, a student. I think his name was Kim Jae-chul. He died during, I think maybe waterboarding, where they flood your lungs with water and you're choking, gasping, then you talk. After he died, the authorities said, oh, well, he had a heart condition. No, he died of torture. So Lee Gun-an, I think he spends a couple of years in jail. He gets out of jail, and Chun Young reads a news report. He's become a moksa. He's become a minister. A guy whose career was torturing people gets out of jail, becomes a minister. What's up with that? I'm not going to get off on a rant. So she decides to write a novel, and she calls it Sengang. And it took a long time for her to figure this out. We were in touch about this. At one point, she wanted to call it the plantier, a French term for an architectural unit that serves as both a ceiling and a floor. It's a French term. But she settled on Sengang because, true to her interest in polarity, Sengang is ginger. It can be kind of spicy, but it can also impart a nice flavor to beverages. So she decides that she's going to treat this issue with focusing on a relationship of a daughter just about to enter university with her parents. And her father is the Igonan stand-in. And he's been away from home Sun, name of the daughter, ironically Sun, good and evil, so Sun's the good one. She's been raised to believe that her father is a patriotic policeman in service to the country. But then, just before she enters university in the fall, she joins, I think it's still called an MT session, membership training. It's like it's where a group of entering first-year students meet with upper class students and get kind of an introduction to what to expect 4 years of university life. So Sun finds herself being attracted to and by an older guy, and after school starts, they decide to head downtown, take in the sights. They're going to go to, they're in Chongno, downtown Seoul, Pagoda Park, a park near Chongno-Iga, if anybody's been in Seoul, familiar with that. And they see a demonstration going on, not at all unusual in Korea. And there's a photograph of a guy, and there's funny thing, the same photograph is also in the newspaper. And the photograph is of Sun's father, who has been released from jail with no publicity, but somebody found out, one of his former victims found out and leaked it to the press, so the news is out. And so Sun is looking, she doesn't understand, well, that's my father, but what's he doing? And the guy says, "What's up, Sana?" And Sana says, "That's my father." And the guy just can't believe it. He said, "What are you telling me? You mean that guy's a blankety blank, no maho, okay." So that, of course, is the end of their relationship. And then mother finally admits what's going on. So yeah, your dad's back, but we have to kind of keep him safe for the time being. So it so happens that the mother runs a Myeongshil, a beauty parlor, and in the back of it, as was often the case, maybe still in ground level businesses, in the back of the establishment, there are living quarters for the proprietor. And so in this case, not only a room, but a tarak bang, which is, think of it as kind of a half attic, often used to store things, supplies. But mother decides, okay, we're going to put dad up in the tarak bang, and you're going to watch out. You're going to look after him, okay? Make sure nobody knows he's there. But, things go wrong as usual. And there's a very interesting conversation that takes place subsequently between Sun and a man she has met. And the way she met him is that outside their home, in the mailbox, she finds this guy hanging around, kind of poking into the mailbox. And it turns out he is one of Dad's torture victims. And he's not necessarily doing this out of ill intent. He's just trying to figure out what happened. And the two of them develop a relationship. And I think at one point, while Dad's upstairs, the two of them are having sex down the room. But at one point, they have a conversation in which Sun is talking about her progress as a hairstylist, but the other guy, the torture victim, is talking about the incident that led to his apprehension, and that was a boatload of people involved in fishing, I think, were caught in the West Sea. And I forget if I think they're originally from North Korea. I don't know if they were refugees, but he apparently was among them, and he was talking about one of the women in that group. So a conversation like this in Korean is called Hwangseol Suseo. It's a very lively expression. It's a saja sangho, a 4-character Sino-Korean phrase, and which literally translates as horizontal talk, vertical talk. In other words, the conversation is going all over the place. So this, to my mind, is a symptom of trauma that the guy experienced. So another reminder about what the historian Bruce Cummings asked rhetorically: is it possible for an entire nation to be traumatized? So at the end, the ending, I can tell you it's a happy ending in that the Sana and her mother, so her problematic relationship with Dad, she's gotten past that. She's now cementing her relationship with her mother, both of them very active in performing a public service, well, cosmetics, beautician, so forth. So a happy ending to a coming-of-age story for a female university student who learns belatedly that the father she had always admired was, in fact, a torture operative and responsible for at least one death. Okay, that brings us to Kim Sum and Han Myung. So I think all of you are familiar with the fact that not only Korean women, but women from all over Asia, and I believe some Dutch women, some European women as well, were coerced into sexual servitude by Imperial Japan during the Pacific War, or that part of World War II that took place in the Pacific and in Asia. The research by colleagues of mine have found that slightly over 200,000 Korean girls, and girls is what they were when they were taken, were either forcibly taken in the mid to late 1930s as Japan had begun its war, or they were promised jobs where they could earn money to send home to their families. So somewhat over 200,000 girls were taken in one of these two ways, but it's thought that only 10% of them, 20,000, survived and returned to Korea. And even then, it was not until, I think 1991, I think, when the first of these women, now affectionately referred to as Halmani's grandmothers, went public. Her name was Kim Hak-sun. And the story she told was kind of vaguely familiar. I think Koreans knew about this kind of vaguely, but did not want to know about the details of what happened. And what Kim Sum is doing in Han Myung is she researched this very, very rigorously, using the testimony of the Halmani. The testimony In some cases, the essays that they wrote or had written, the reports in the newspapers. One of the Halmanis came to the U.S. and testified before the U.S. Congress. So she used all these materials to get detail about what the girls experienced in the so-called comfort stations in Manchuria. But one thing that Juchan and I always emphasize in our decision to translate is that the theme is very important, but equally important is the literary style. This has to be a work that survives as a work of English language literature. And in this case, what Kim Sum has done, the present of the story takes place today in a neighborhood in Seoul that's undergoing renovation. And this is happening all over the Seoul metropolitan area. And most of the occupants have moved out, but the protagonist is still there. So just as she's lived a shadow existence since she came back to Korea, she, in the present day, is living a shadow existence. She has virtually no neighbors that she has a social relationship with. But the one thing she's focused on is how many of the Halmanis are left. And at the end of the book, she finds that there's only one left, which is one of the meanings of the title of our translation. So she decides, in a sense, to go public. She's not one of the registered, self-reported Halmani. No one knows what she's been through. So she gets on a bus, public bus, and is going to go to the hospital and tell the Halmani, who is the only one left, after you die, there will be one left, me. But before she gets to the hospital, she has a revelation. She remembers a trip that she and the other girls took from the comfort station, Manchuria, to a nearby town to take care of the Japanese who happened to be in town. And to get to town, they had to cross a river on a boat. And on the way back across the river, the boat encounters some rough water, and the protagonist is thrown overboard. So there she is in the water, she's below the surface, she's reaching up, and when she finally breaks the surface, she hears the girls shouting to her. What are they saying? They're saying, "Pungil! Pungira!" Pungil, that's her name, her given name, the name given to her at birth by her family, a name that she has not used, that she's practically forgotten over the last 70 years. This is the ending of the story. So what's the meaning of this? Why is this important? It's a matter of what we call jungche, which means identity, personal identity. So what Kim Sum seems to be suggesting is that it's time we recover these 200,000 plus girls from historical memory. We recover not just Pungil, but each and every one of those 200,000 plus girls. And to realize that each one of those girls had an ancestral home, family history, very important in Korea. Each of them had a family. Each of them had a community. And in this way, we don't kind of put this group of women in the dark places in historical memory because it's too painful for us to think about them. But it gives us an opportunity to use some empathy. Yes, this was terrible, but this happened. What can I do? What can we do to make sure that something like this never happens again? And interestingly, the very first, after this book was published in 2020, The very first person who reached out to us for commentary was a member of a Japanese news service. I've forgotten it, but it's comparable to the Korean news service, Yonhap. And his first question to us is, why did it take 70 years for a Korean writer to write a novel about the Cheongshin-dae, the so-called comfort women? And our response is basically what I've just told you. Okay, how am I doing for time? 30 minutes? Excellent. Next, Kongji Jung, Togani. So, Kongji Jung is, she was an English major at Yonsei University in Seoul at a time, so she's in her early 60s now. She, at a time when many fiction writers majored in a foreign literature at university. Now, probably the majority, if they major in literature, it'll be Korean literature. And early on, she was familiar with Arthur Miller's play, The Crucible. Anybody familiar with The Crucible? The Crucible is a terrible. It's an accounting of basically a small-scale massacre that took place in Salem, Massachusetts, about 10 miles from where I was born. And what happened was, very conservative Puritan elders decided that there was a group of women who were not hardline Puritan in terms of their spirituality. So they decided that they were a menace to the society, and they executed them. And the way of executing back then, they were tied to a wooden stake and they were burned alive. So the American playwright Arthur Miller wrote a play about this, mid-century maybe, called The Crucible. And when we learned about this novel by Kongji Jung, we had first come in contact with her back in the mid-1990s when we translated one of her classic stories, or Daepyo Jakpum, as the Korean literature establishment likes to say. So we found out about this, and we decided to start translating it even before it had come out in book form. It was being serialized online. So what's it about? It is about an actual case at a school in the city of Gwangju in South Jeolla province called Inhwa, the Inhwa School. And the Inhwa School was created by a minister, a moksa, and in Kongji Jung's novel, the institute, the school, is for disabled, special needs children, male and female, and it is called the Home of Benevolence. That's our translation in English, the Home of Benevolence, ironically. But what we have in actuality is a kind of reign of sexual terror run by the two twin sons of the founder of the Home of Benevolence and one or more dormitory supervisors who are sexually abusing the children, male and female. This is an actual, this actually happened. And when the perpetrators were finally brought to trial, the two brothers, I think, were given suspended sentences, and one of the dormitory supervisors who could not afford a high-powered defense attorney, I think he got 6 months or something like that. This so outraged the Korean public that they demanded and were successful in getting the laws governing sexual abuse of minors strengthened. And perhaps even more importantly, there used to be a statute of limitations for reporting such crimes. The Assembly eliminated that statute of limitations. So a very, very obvious example of a work of literature that matters, that can change things. And again, about the literary style, it is a sete so-so. So a sete so-so is generally understood as a novel of manners. It's a novel about the way people live, the way they get along. And what's the how people live, how they get along? What's that in this novel? Well, it's how the privileged class in the provincial city of Gwangju kind of gathers together to help protect the two sons of the founder when the local Human Rights Commission goes public with the abuses and the decisions made to imprison them. There's an interesting chapter about a huge church service, Sunday church service, that is dominated by friends and supporters of the two brothers and the founder. So they all kind of gather together, the police, the educational system. They all say, well, it's not our problem, go see so-and-so. This kind of revolving door, lack of a response. But another distinctive aspect of this novel is there's a courtroom scene. So if any of you have ever read what are sometimes called police procedurals or courtroom dramas, the American author John Grisham is a very good example of a best-selling author who writes about what goes on in the courtroom. And in the so there's a long section of the novel devoted to the trial in which the two brothers are found guilty. And the determining testimony is by one of the girls. Her name is Yeondu. She herself has not been abused, but one of the younger girls, much more special needs than she is, she kind of takes care of her. And so Yeondu has witnessed one of the assaults of this younger girl, which happened in the principal's office. And she has testified that she saw the principal and not the principal. So the defense attorney says, well, Miss Yeondu, these two, as you know, these two gentlemen, term gentleman often used, are identical. So how did you know, how can you be sure that it was the principal who was the assaulter? And she said, will you excuse me just a minute? And so with the court's permission, she goes over and looks the principal in the eye and does some sign language. So because so many of the kids cannot hear, sign language is very important, but not many of the teachers are very good at it. So she goes over and she says something in sign language to the principal, and his face gets red. And the prosecutor then confers with Yeondu and with the help of an interpreter. And what Yeondu testifies is that, well, I went up, I confronted the principal, and in sign language, I told him what he had said to us in sign language, which was, if you report what happened, some very bad things are going to happen to you. And that when she signed that back to him, that's when his face got red. And so it was on the basis of her testimony So the heroine in this novel turns out to be a special needs girl who cannot even speak, but is able to communicate through sign language. Okay, so let's move on to Jung. And Jung is an emerging writer. He also has experienced a disability, a stuttering disability. In fact, one of his first published stories is titled Dut, Dut, Dut. And, but he's overcome that disability to become a lecturer at, is it Hanshin-daehakyo? It's a university outside of Seoul. And he offers us a novel called Progetto, basically from Hangulization of from Tonio. Who's Tonio? Well, Tonio turns out to be Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, the aviator who during World War II was on an intelligence mission flying, I think, documents over the Mediterranean, and his plane crashed and he was lost at sea. So Jung uses the story of this individual to emphasize what happens after a person dies. So the novel starts out on the shores of Madeira, one of the, is it the Canary Islands? It's in the Mediterranean off the coast of Spain. And there's a team of 3 volcanologists. They study volcanoes, eruptions, and so forth. And there happens to be a stranding on the beaches. Everybody familiar with a stranding? Stranding means to leave something unattended. Well, what are stranding themselves are whales, pilot whales. But there's also a blue whale, and the blue whale disgorges a living being that looks kind of like a human being that's transformed partly into a fish. And one of the team is very curious about this, and he goes up, and this being indicates some human tendencies, and he decides to take it home. And when one of the other team members comes home, he can't understand what this is. And I should tell you, the third team member, a woman named Ellen, who was in love with the protagonist, the one Simon is his name. She lost her life. She went diving to underwater, and something happened, and she never resurfaced. So as this being gradually adopts human form and becomes capable of speech, or at least writing, he reports to Simon that he has seen Ellen underwater. And it turns out that when the individual representing Saint-Exupéry went into the sea, a blue whale guided him to an underwater paradise kind of. There's even a creation story that goes along with this, which is a lot of fun. So the being goes down, comes up, and has evidence for Tonio, or for Simon rather, that it is indeed Ellen, and the evidence he brings up is a bracelet that's got 2 emblems on it, one of them representing Ella and one representing their unborn child. So she was pregnant when she was lost. So what happened, there's a happy ending to this. Exupéry had a French woman that he was in love with, and at the end, they're able to meet very briefly, but in the meantime, he's been wasting away. He's been underseas for 50 years, so there's a happy ending. But what's important about this? Okay, is anybody familiar with a tragedy that happened in April 2014 off the southeast coast of Korea? The ferry called the Sewol was transporting a group of maybe 200 or 300 high school students along with some teachers to the island of Jeju off the southern coast. The boat, it was later determined, the boat was kind of bribed by a company to carry a lot of commercial goods on it. So the boat was overloaded and it hit rough waters off the southeast coast of the Korean Peninsula and it capsized. And the survivors' accounts tell us that the officers on board said, "Okay, don't do anything. You'll be all right. We'll take care of you." And then they themselves departed the boat, and of course, nothing happened. And over 200 students and I think some teachers perished. So yet again, another human disaster in Korea. There's remember the department store 20 years earlier that collapsed, one of the bridges across the Han River. Enough of this happened that there was a feature issue in an academic journal called "Is Korea a Risk Society?" So this incident has created enough literature, fiction, poetry, critical essays that I think of it as Sewolho Munok or Sewol literature. But what is also at play here, can any of you think of another culture icon from Korean folk tales that, does this remind you someone else who sacrificed herself to a shipload of merchants a long time ago, back when tigers used to smoke? Remember Darcy Packett, that Horenga Dambe Pilte Yegi? He didn't explain how that came about. You want to know the origins of this? So tobacco historically is a relatively recent arrival in Korea. So if we consider, thousands of years of Korean history, I believe it was in the 1500s, shortly early Chosun, that I think it was Dutch merchants that came on shore, and one of the goods they supplied their hosts with was tobacco. So as we all know, back then, with a stratified society, items like alcohol, anything you utilized in your daily life, it goes to the elite first, and women, no. So the idea is that back then, tobacco was basically a novelty item that had not yet achieved high user status, so we speak. So anybody could smoke back in the old days, regardless of your class. Anybody could smoke, even tigers. So the answer to my question, cultural icon, Shim-chung. Anybody familiar with Shim-chung? Family name Shim, Chung, Weija, one element given name. Shim-chung even today, remains the exemplar of filial piety, that is, devotion to one's parents. So Shim-chung's father, who's a widower, is a would-be Kwago exam taker, although he's kind of getting on in years, and he's very impulsive. So one day he decides to visit the home of the gentleman whose son he has in mind for Chung's marriage. But on the way there, he's, I think he's what we would call, he's legally blind. I mean, he can kind of see, but not really enough to function normally. And he stumbles and he falls into a ditch. A Buddhist alms seeker is, somebody who goes around, can you spare us some rice and we'll bring you good fortune from the Buddha. Helps him out and gives him the spiel about, if you can help us out, great things are going to happen. You'll recover your sight, all this. And Shimbongsa, as he's called, blind man Shim, says, yeah. What can I give you? And the Buddhist guy says, we can always use some grain, some rice grain. How about 300 bushels? Anybody know how much a bushel is? It's huge. It's huge. 300 bushels? No way. Shimbongsa, he's not a big landowner. So says, yeah, okay. And but there's a condition that comes with it. You are going to have to, your daughter is going to, later he changes his mind. He realizes, what am I doing? I can't come up with 300 bushels of rice. So goes back, meets the monk, and the monk says, well, okay, we understand, but you can help us out another way. And that's you give us your daughter because there's a merchant ship that's going to Nanjing, China, and crossing the Indang Sea. That's stormy. It's kind of rough, and so we need to placate the Dragon King that lives under the Indang Sea. So Shimbong says, well, okay. But so all he tells Chung is that she's going as a kind of a spiritual present. She's going to bring good luck to the boat, but he doesn't tell her they're going to throw her overboard as a human sacrifice. Well, the ship leaves, over she goes, but she ends up being discovered by, now what's the animal? Is it a turtle? And she gets taken to the Dragon Palace, and the Dragon King says, wow, that is so kind of you, so decent of you. I'm going to fix you up with somebody you can live with here. And he does. But eventually, Chung wants to go back to the surface and see her father again. And she happens to be put on shore in China at a place where the emperor is convening a meeting of all the deaf people in the area. And somehow word of this gets to Shimbongsa, the father, and there's a happy ending. They reunite. So what Chung Young-jun seems to be emphasizing here is that although our loved ones may be perished, they'll be lost in their physical form, they are still up there, and often they're worried about us. They hope we're doing okay. And I should also mention that this is a central point in the practice of Native Korean spirituality, Muso. So basically, this is a hopeful novel. Be thankful for your loved ones when they were here. Don't despair. They're still up there. You can take comfort from them, and they'll take comfort from you. Do I have time very quickly for Wang Jini? Yeah, okay, very quickly. Wang Jini. So I mentioned earlier about the Giseng. What Wang Jini, we have no firsthand evidence that there ever was a person named Huang Jini, but we have a ton of secondary sources, mainly in the form of writers and artists. And in the present day, films are made of her. People continue to write fiction about her. I think there are at least 6 films of her, and I would guess maybe at least a couple of those are from North Korea, because she was supposedly born in, I think, near Haeju or somewhere on the West Sea that is now part of North Korea. She was at least 6 shijo, the short vernacular verse form, are credited to her, and I think 4 or 5 poems written in Chinese. But what really seemed to have stood out is her beauty and her performing skill, and she had a series of liaisons with well-born Chosun men. But get this, in 2002, a North Korean author is given a Manhei Daesang, the one that Professor Jung was kind enough to mention that I got 16 years after that. And it was precisely for this novel, Huang Jini, which somehow ended up in an edition in South Korea. And the question, of course, is if anybody has studied literary production in North Korea, for decades and decades, the dictum was from Kim Il-sung, writers are engineers of the human soul. How do they engineer the human soul? Well, they engineer them to celebrate the group, the party. You don't do things by yourself. Everything is for the good of the fatherland, etc., etc. So how does Imsuk Jung get off by writing a novel about a woman who had a series of liaisons with the upper class, with the landed gentry, and was a performer? Well, the male counterpart ends up being not a upper class man, but a guy named Nomi. That's the all-purpose name for a guy, or it could be worse than that. And both he and Jini are characterized very well. Nomi has a very strong, but a kind of protective presence. And we've translated more than a third of the novel. And the last part we translate is where Jini has kind of agreed to be a partner to Nomi, and she has sex for the first time. And it's worth mentioning, I think, that this novel raised some eyebrows in South Korea because it's pretty explicit. You could say it's probably R-rated. So what we see in this is a coming-of-age story of a girl who has suffered from class divisions because her mother is also an entertaining woman. Not sure whether she was technically a giseng, but her father was well born. Now, Korea, as I think most of you know, is a patrilineal society where descent is gauged through the guys, so the father down. So usually a son will always inherit the status of his father, san nong kong sang, either scholar, farmer, somebody who works with his hands, or at the very bottom, interestingly, commerce. But that doesn't apply for girls. If a girl is born to a woman who is outside the class structure, a chunmin, she also inherits that chunmin out of class structure. But even so, an arrangement has been made to the son of a well-born man. But then something happens. Jini and her friend and kind of young mistress, Igami, they're out. There's spacious grounds out in back, trees, a brook, and Jeannie writes a line of Hanshi, poetry in Chinese, and puts it in a spot in a tree that is accessible, and a young man he climbs over the wall one night, and sees it, and then he gets a glimpse of Jeannie, and immediately he's smitten. Oh gosh, she has to be mine. Oh, I have to. But he never gets a chance to meet her, and he dies of a broken heart. So when the family of the well-born boy who's supposed to be married, Jeannie finds out, no, ain't going to happen. So, and by the way, you'll find a chapter from our translation that it's the only part of this anthology that's not a short story, it's a chapter. So, why is it important? Well, Huang Jini has been brought to life time and again in the modern period through film, through literature. But is this the real Huang Jini we're seeing? The one who's famous because of her liaisons with women? What about the rest of her life? What about coming of age? So we see this novel as a way of humanizing a cultural icon. So I'll make my conclusion very brief. We came across a quote from Malala Yousafzai. Do you remember her? She's the Afghani, the young Afghani woman who survived an assassination attempt by the Taliban, and she became a spokesperson for Afghan girls, but mainly for young women everywhere. And she was quoted as saying, "One book can change the world." So Juchan and I are thinking, well, if one book can change the world, maybe one translation can change the world. And so in that sense, might not How in Heaven's Name validate the lives who have left their native Korea forever, a population movement that has produced a formidable body of diaspora literature. So once again, validation. In Korean, injang, you acknowledge the existence of one individual. Might not Mina ultimately help change the South Korean educational system from a chusei, get ahead in the world factory, to an environment where students at the most vulnerable stage of their lives are allowed to grow and develop and express themselves as individuals? Might not perhaps The Catcher in the Loft can help alert us to potential abuses of power and the temptation to resort to violence in an increasingly unstable world. One Left asks us to retrieve, to take back more than 200,000 Korean girls from historical oblivion and restore to them the dignity of their identity, their jungche as individuals. Togani has already demonstrated the power of literature to effect structural change in society. The Togani Bup that strengthened the laws for abuse of minors and got rid of the statute of limitations. Might it help a society used to concealing the disabled from public view to enable those individuals to lead constructive, stigma-free lives? Can From Tonio remind us and perhaps perpetuate a tradition of native spirituality in which the channeling of the voices of the victims, the channeling by the practitioner, the mudang, of those who have died a premature or unnatural death will allow them to find closure and a final resting place? And finally, might Huang Jini help to humanize an individual who has been both cultural icon and gender stereotype? Thank you. I would welcome questions, discussions, comments.
Thank you so much. If you concluded your lecture perfectly in time, thank you. It was very interesting. We have about 10 minutes for eventual curiosity. Okay.
Okay. First of all, thank you for your lecture. I wanted to ask you, it's more of a curiosity. When I was researching for a presentation about a translator of Korean poetry, specifically who's Korean American, I came across the idea of Han, this sentiment of grief that it's very common in Korean novels, and especially in the diaspora novels, and also in Korean American novels, maybe in English. And I wanted to ask you if you've encountered this in your work, and if so, what are the difficulties in translating that through English into English?
Yeah, nice questions. First of all, let me make a couple of comments about. I've heard the term novels used again and again and again. A novel, specifically, is a jangpyeon soso. It's a book-length work of fiction, but in the Korean to English dictionaries, you'll find soso. So soso is the Korean word, but you'll see soso translated as novel. That's incorrect. A novel is a jangpyeon soso. And the reason for this is that back in the old days, there was no distinction. Soso was soso. It wasn't danpyeon soso, junpyeon soso, jangpyeon soso. So it's important, I think, in English to distinguish what you're talking about. And the reason for this, and I think I mentioned this in the Penguin Book of Korean Short Stories, is that the short story is a relatively new feature in Korean literary history. Because before it was always so-so, but suddenly young Korean guys are going to Japan for their high school and university education, and they're reading a lot of fiction that's been translated mostly by they have a realist kind of stream. So particular favorites in Korea were stories from societies that were undergoing problems. For example, France, which had been defeated in the most recent Prussian War, and Russia, Tsarist Russia. So very few Korean writers can be accurately termed novelists, which in English means someone who is either very well known, especially for his or their novels, jangpyeon soso, or someone who during his or their career has written only or almost only novels. So a suggestion about nomenclature. As far as Han is concerned, what I like to say is that in my experience, I've found three major, I guess you could call them stereotypes: Han, Hung, and Jung. So Jung can be understood as affect or feeling in general. Hung, I think I mentioned to another group, is the excitement you feel at the perception of beauty. But my friend and colleague, the late great Kevin O'Rourke, liked to think of Hung as what you feel if you've been fishing for 2 or 3 hours and suddenly you feel that jerk at the end of your pole. That means you've caught a fish. But Han is perhaps the least clear of those three in terms of, say, a single word to describe it. It can refer to resignation, bitterness, rancor, I got to get even. Something is wrong. So I think Han is very much situation specific. So depending on the poem or the short story or the novel in which Han appears, what could it be? Could it be a loss of family during one of these disasters or during the war? Can it be the loss of families through separation from the division of the Korean Peninsula after liberation, 1945? And then you can, I think, you can find the proper term for it. But some readers, some critics will think of it as it's used so often it's become a cliche. That may be true, but I like to think of expressions like this as a good kind of entry point for those of us who have little or no background in Korean literature, or especially in Korean culture. Juntong tradition is what I like to emphasize. Oh, did you have another question? Oh, okay.
Okay. So we have just 5 minutes for last question, if you have.
Or the last 5 questions, a minute each.
So last question, very, I think maybe simple. What is, because you translate so many novels, and
Fiction.
what was what was your most difficult and interesting challenge in your work as translator?
Probably the works of authors like Chim-an-sik and Kim Yoo-jung. We're now translating a story by Kim Yoo-jung, who, like so many writers during the colonial period, he died very young. I think he was only in his early 30s. But his stories are very earthy, and he is from Gangwon province, so you'll see some Gangwon-do pronunciation. So the first story I co-translated with one of my mentors, Kim Jong-un, was a story that's titled Anhae. Now, Anhae means wife, but the standard spelling of Anhae is Ane, An meaning the indoor, but in Gangwon it was pronounced Anhae. So in the case of Chim-an-sik is a wonderful oral writer, so I like to compare him with one of the storytellers from old-time Korea. A lot of dialogue in his stories. In fact, he wrote 10 plays in addition to his collected works, fill 10 big volumes published in Korea. So fortunately, with the case of Chim-an-sik, we have a Chim-an-sik Ohui Sajan. So Ohui Vocabulary Sajan Dictionary. So it's a pretty thick book, so we can figure out most of what he's written. And an added plus is that Chim-an-sik is from what I like to refer to as my home province in Korea. It was the first province I lived in 1978, Jeollabuk-do. So he's a Cholla Saram, or as people who don't, there are regional rivalries in Korea even today. I remember we took a trip, Jucha and I took a trip to the DMZ, the line that separates North Korea and South Korea. And the bus driver said, well, there you can see all the security guards. You won't find any Cholla Nom up here. So basically you're saying you won't find any Cholla SOBs or idiots up here because they can't be trusted. But yeah, that's those writers are a challenge. But there are also writers, and I'll talk more about this next Monday when I speak, when I offer some guidelines for translation. There are also writers that include a lot of subtext. So subtext is part of the text that's very important to the story, but it's not written down. Why? Because the author thinks that all of his or their readers will understand it. For example, drinking culture or clothing or foods. They don't need to be explained in detail. And you don't use footnotes because then that makes it looks like an educational text. No, it's not. It's a work of literature.
So much, and I'd like to invite all you to another lecture. He will take a lecture on Thursday, right? At 6 o'clock. And this Thursday, right?
Yes, in Sarah, I have to check with her whether.
Okay, we can
She's-
check. And okay,
but,
I will.
This is
later.
6 to 7:30 in a classroom with
Okay.
Professor Bociccio.
Bokikyo.
Bociccio.
And this Friday, we will have an international conference where he will have a brief presentation also. So, okay, thank you.